And welcome back to Deck Building. I am your host, Demo. And how many ways are there to build a commander deck? Of course, there's essentially an infinite amount of ways, but particularly the methods you go about building a commander deck, particularly with regards to your commander. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, which funny enough is really fundamental to the format of Commander, and I have not really talked about it. I made a video last year just on a lark talking about choosing the commander for your deck, right? And it ended up being a really important video, I think. Basically, I came up with two methods of choosing the commander for your deck. Method one is I have a commander that I want to build around, very obviously, right? Like the new set that just came out, there's a commander there that I really like and I want to build a deck with it. The second method being I have an idea for a deck and then the commander comes after. I go find a commander that obviously fits the colors of what I want and fits the theme of what I'm doing. And of course, with partner commanders in particular, that makes life a lot easier when you're doing that method. I made a video a couple months back talking about monolith commanders, which I'm glad to see is gotten a lot of people talking about that topic. And then I made a video a couple weeks later talking about how I've changed my deck building style, where I don't like monolith commanders, but also I don't want to build decks where I really badly need my commander in play, because then my commander gets removed a couple of times and I'm just sitting there spinning my wheels, not doing anything. Not a lot of fun. Had some comments though of people saying, okay, but if you're not building around your commander, then aren't you just playing like 100 card singleton vintage, right? Essentially, you're playing Canadian Highlander, which funny enough, I made a video about that last week. And I mean, yeah, you're kind of right. And I started thinking about it and I'm like, you know what? I started thinking about my own decks, which I will get to, but also I started thinking about maybe there isn't two methods to building a commander deck. Maybe there is three. The first method, obviously, is I have a commander, an Atraxa or a Korvold. I want to build a deck around those commanders. I just think they're great commanders and I want to build a deck around them. The first method is I'm building specifically around my commander, and obviously I want it to be in play in order for my deck to work. Method two is I have an idea for a deck that involves counters, like say I want to make a level deck, or I have an idea that involves sacrificing, like a food themed deck, something like that. Then I find a commander like Atraxa that very perfectly fits the leveling up counter theme, or a commander like Korvold that wants me to be sacrificing permanents all the time, right? So I have the idea first, then I find the commander, but I find a commander that very perfectly fits the theme of what I'm doing. So I would say that's the method two. But of course, there's another method. And the other method is one that I actually, funny enough, really used to hate. And because I've changed my deck building style, I've actually gravitated towards it. And I don't love it a whole lot. And I might have to do something about it. Method number three is I'm just playing a deck and I don't really care what my commander is doing, right? I used to play against decks like this all the time, like ATOG decks, or essentially 5-color good stuff decks, right? I'm just putting a 5-color good stuff deck together. ATOG, or one of those other old school 5-color commanders is in the command zone just because I want to play a 5-color commander, and my commander is never going to hit the battlefield. I'm not building around my commander at all. I don't care about it in my strategy. It is completely meaningless to what I am doing. I used to play against a lot of Erebos decks back in the day. Same thing. They were just mono black good stuff decks. I played against them all the time. It was just, I'm ramping like crazy, Crypt Ghast, Cabal Coffers, and then I'm going to win with an Exsanguinate or a Torment of Hellfire. And they would just have Erebos as their commander because, I mean, yeah, they would use them. Having your opponents not gain life is handy. Being able to draw cards, obviously, is really handy as well. But the commander for my deck is not only completely inconsequential, I could easily swap it out for anything else, right? Those mono black Erebos decks could likely swap out any mono black commander and the deck would run perfectly fine the exact same. Those 5-color good stuff decks, same thing. Didn't matter what was in the command zone as long as you had access to the 5 colors. And that's the kind of deck that I'm not the biggest fan of. And that is what those people are talking about. I mean, why even playing commander at that point, right? We should differentiate. We should differentiate between commander and possibly other Highlander formats where obviously you don't have a commander, so it doesn't really matter what you're doing there. It should matter. Your commander really should matter. So I don't want to be a Method 3 deck builder. I want to be either Method 1 or Method 2. I started looking at my own decks, and of course, just talked about my decks, so I'm not going to get too much into it, but my Name is One deck, which is my oldest deck, is absolutely a Method 1 deck. This was when I first started going down the rabbit hole of I want to find these really underwhelming, janky commanders that I can build around, so obviously I was planning to build around it. I saw a Name is One. I was like, man, how do you make a really interesting deck with this? I thought I made a pretty great one. I love that deck, and I most certainly was building around my commander here. This is absolutely a Method 1 commander without question. My Tashana deck, however, is actually a Method 2 deck, and I didn't even really realize it until I started actually thinking about this process. Mostly the genesis for that deck was there was just a bunch of creatures in Simic colors, favorite creatures of mine that I wanted to put in a deck together that happened to all have ETBs. So I made it an ETB strategy. Tashana was a fairly new commander at the time and also not very popular. So I used Tashana because wants there to be lots of creatures in play and obviously has a really nice ETB as well. So that is what I would say is archetypical Method 2 commander deck building, is I'm finding a commander where I have the exact colors I want, and I also have a commander that works with the theme of what I'm doing and also plays into it and gives me an advantage. And I actually do want to cast my commander. I don't know if I've ever played my Tashana deck without getting my commander into play. Of course, I want to cast it, right? That for me is Method 2. My Patron of the Kitsune deck, definitely a Method 1 deck, right? Again, just finding some underwhelming mono white commander that I wanted to build a deck around. Did a little bit of the Fox Tribal, did a little bit of the life gain theme. Definitely a Method 1 deck. If I move forward to my Lulu deck, however, that's where things get a little interesting. I actually am not sure where I would slot this one in. It's a combination of Method 1 and Method 2. And the reason why, of course, is because it used to be my Gerard deck. My Gerard deck was a Method 1 deck. I saw Gerard, again, saw that it was very unpopular, so I wanted to build a deck with it. I actually didn't have a Boros deck at the time, and I wanted one because everyone was always crapping all over Boros. And so I saw Gerard and wanted to build a deck around it. I thought the deck building strategy there was actually fairly obvious. So that deck, the Gerard deck, was a Method 1 deck, but then I swapped it to Lulu and Guild Artisan, which, funny enough, now it's obviously a Method 2 deck, right? Because if I can so easily swap out the commanders, is it actually a Method 1 deck anymore? I mean, it is the case, and especially now because they're printing commanders that are doing the exact same thing as a commander did before, it's still a Method 1 deck, even though you could very easily swap it out for a commander that does something very similar. That being said, though, my Lulu deck is more built around Lulu than it is built around Gerard, obviously. I did swap out a few things, and in fact, funny enough, I just got a damning verdict in the mail. Talked about this on my Patreon because I had not even considered building around the +1/+1 counter theme really at all. It just never occurred to me because the deck was a Gerard deck before, so I was building around that theme. And I thought, why not throw a couple of cards in there that work with the +1/+1 counter theme as well? So I would say my Lulu deck is definitely, oh man, it's a toughie. You could call it a Method 1 deck. I definitely want my Lulu in play. So I guess I would probably call it a Method 1 deck, although I could swap out the commander, right? So I guess if you could swap out the commander and maybe exchange a couple of cards, like there's definitely a few cards I would have to take out, then you could maybe make it a Method 2 deck. This one for me definitely is one that's kind of in the middle, but ultimately I would say it's a Method 1 deck because I definitely really want my Lulu to get going. Getting to my newer decks, my Drownu deck is most certainly not a Method 1 deck. And again, this was an idea first deck. And it's, I would say, a Method 2 deck. Some people might say this is a Method 3 deck because I don't really need my Drellnu at all, right? I definitely could play that deck without casting my Drellnu ever. However, he is really good. He obviously is in the colors I want. He is doing a really nice assist there. And in fact, funny enough, the gameplay I just did with that, maybe I'll post it on my channel. I did exactly what I want to be doing in that video. And funny enough, right at the start of the game, I had told my patrons the Drellnu is just a tough commander to play with already. And I have a pretty tough theme that I'm doing here. So maybe it would be better if I just used a better commander, an easier commander to assist me in what I'm doing here, right? It's very much a Method 2 deck. There actually is quite a few commanders that I could swap out in Dimir colors that would help me. And so, I mean, it's a graveyard strategy and a milling strategy. Lots you can do there in Dimir colors, right? Discard strategy as well. So there really is a lot. However, funny enough, at the start of that game, I had talked about swapping out Drownu. That was going to be my last game with him at the helm. But I did exactly what I wanted to, right? I have mind over matter in that deck. That's one of the cards that just works perfectly with Drownu, where I'm discarding. Obviously, I'm in a discarding theme, and I can keep untapping my Drownu to constantly be casting stuff from my graveyard. And I went off in that game. Everything worked perfectly. So now I'm like, okay, do I want to swap him out, right? It is, I would say, definitely a method 2 deck. However, I do have what I would consider a method 3 deck, which is Sophina. And this is one of the reasons why I'm making this video, because I don't like having a method 3 deck, right? And of course, my Sophina deck is a sacrifice lands theme in Boros colors. There's not really any good commanders for that, although I have had a few people throw out suggestions. I actually, funny enough, have another patron with a very similar deck. They use Plarg as the commander because they want to be discarding their lands into their graveyard. They're doing much more of a lands in my graveyard theme than I am. I've also had people tell me they have a Quintorius because Quintorius wants stuff to leave your graveyard. So again, they're doing the lands out of my graveyard thing a little bit more. So that works there. I had a guy tell me that he used Oscar for his commander for that deck. And I imagine it's because he's using artifact lands. So if you're using artifact lands, obviously you can sack them and get them back. So that works there, right? So those are all different commanders for the same strategy, but they're all doing it a little bit differently than I am. My main strategy for the deck is I want less lands in play. That's the main strategy I'm building around. I am doing a lot of those other things, but I'm mostly doing I just want not a lot of lands in play and take advantage of that and punish my opponents for it, obviously. Sophina, of course, has nothing to do with any of that, right? It has nothing to do with it. This is, I would say, a method 3 deck. I could very easily swap out Sophina and have any other commander. In fact, there's probably a couple of those commanders that I just mentioned that might even be better. I only chose Sophina, again, underwhelming commander. Number 2, it's a commander that I thought was kind of interesting when I first saw it, I guess. And number 3, it is making the clue tokens, which is kind of card advantage. I can get Sophina out early in the game, attack a few times before I get other things going in my deck, make some clue tokens. I have done that a few times, draw a few cards. I also am a little bit in the token theme, right? I have some cards that are creating tokens, and so I actually do have an Anointed Procession in the deck, which of course helps with my commander and also helps with all the other tokens I'm making. And I also have a Benny Brax in the deck. But again, both of those cards, yeah, I could take them out if I swap commanders, but I could leave them in. They're both pretty good in the deck, regardless of who my commander is. So this is absolutely a method 3 deck. And for that reason, I was trying to think, something about this deck bothers me. I really like it a lot, but something is rubbing me the wrong way here. And I think that's what it is. I think I made a method 3 deck incidentally, and I really don't like it for that reason. I really don't like that my commander has nothing to do with my deck. That bothers me. You're right, whoever that guy is, who commented on my video, you might as well be playing Highlander Vintage. You're right. I might as well be, because my commander has nothing to do with the deck. And so for that reason, I will be changing this deck, and I gave my patrons a little bit of heads up the direction I will be going here. I wanted to do something different. I didn't love a couple of things that were happening here. Obviously, the main one being my commander had nothing to do with the deck. I want a commander that at the very least is going to assist me in what I'm doing, like the Drownu or the Tishana. Yeah, I could swap out commanders to something else. I could swap out my Tishana to another Simic commander that has an ETB or something. I could swap out my Drownu for another blue-black milling or graveyard or discard commander, sure. But they do work with what I'm doing, and I want to have a commander that works with what I'm doing. And I just don't find any Boros commanders that want to fit with what I'm doing. So for that reason, I will be changing colors, and not just for that reason. Also, because incidentally, I happened across one card in particular, but then I found a few more. I started thinking of it, there's actually a few cards that work great in the strategy, and those cards are in blue. Blue actually works better than red in the strategy I want to be doing in this deck. The strategy I want to be doing in this deck is I want to have less lands in play than my opponents. Blue is actually better at that than red is, in my opinion. There's actually a lot you can do there. I'll throw out Moloku the Clouded Mirror. That's a great example of, now I can pick up my lands. I don't actually need to sacrifice them. That works too. I really don't like that I'm getting rid of red. I had toyed with the idea of doing a Jeskai deck that is doing this, but again, no commander that fits. So guess I'm not doing that either. I looked at Azorius, right? So I'm doing a white-blue deck here, and I did indeed find a commander that I thought fit the theme. It is Niembi, and maybe you can figure out how exactly it fits the theme of what I'm doing. If you go watch, I believe, the Underwhelming Commanders video I did about Niembi. I believe I did that theme in that deck. And again, if you look at Moloku and then you look at Niambi, you might be able to figure out it's different for sure. It's less of a land sacrifice. And in fact, funny enough, I do more of the permanent sacrifice, right? So Renounce is a card I have in the deck already, sacrifices permanence, right? Read the Ruins is a blue card that sacrifices permanence. So I'm going down that theme a little bit too. It is a lot different than the Sofina version. I love it a lot, and I will probably end up talking about it entirely in another video. I know people are going to be asking about what I'm doing in the deck. That's not what this video is about. This is not a deck tech video. This is about all the different methods that you can use to build a commander deck. There is essentially three, right? The three methods are, I absolutely am building around that commander and, essentially the monolith commander strategy, right? You either have a monolith commander, which is a commander that you absolutely need in play, or your deck doesn't really do anything, but you can build your deck that way, where if my commander isn't in play, it doesn't do a whole lot. Now, you can get around it, right? I'm not saying that if you actually build around your commander, you're screwed if your commander doesn't stick on the table. There are ways to get around it. You can protect your commander. You can have backups for your commander. There are ways around it. If your deck just synergizes well, you'll probably be all right, even if your commander is not in play. But method one is essentially, I have a commander that I absolutely want to be building around, and I absolutely want it to be in play. Method two is I have a deck idea or a strategy or an archetype. That's what I'm doing first, and then I'm going to find a commander that fits that strategy. And thankfully, because we're getting 50 commanders in every set now, it's a lot easier to do so, although I will say we still don't have a Boros Lands commander. Not that I want one. I'm just saying there isn't really a Boros commander that will fit that strategy. Maybe a blessing in disguise because I really love the new deck that I built. And method three, the one you should be avoiding, is I just don't care what my commander it is. It has nothing to do with my deck, right? I essentially just want those colors. You guys let me know, how many decks do you have that are method one, method two, method three, right? Look through them and let me know. Are all your decks method one? Possibly. I actually thought all my decks were method one because that's how I used to build commander decks. And funny enough, there are a few that just accidentally happen to be method two. And then of course I've moved way, way more towards method two now. In fact, almost entirely on method two now, but avoid that method three. That's my advice. You guys let me know what you think in the comments below. That is it for today though, and thanks for tuning in.